It is July 2nd of 1863. Fighting on the Union left flank is beginning to die down. On the Union right flank, 3 Confederate brigades under the command of General Allegheny Johnson are getting ready to assault the slopes up Culp's Hill. Waiting for them are 1,400 New Yorkers under the command of George Sears Greene. We're going to walk in the footsteps of the Confederate brigades here as they assault Culp's Hill, and let's see how they fare against the Union defenses here. So we are looking down towards East Confederate Avenue here at Culp's Hill. And around 7 p.m., Allegheny Johnson gave the order to advance. So in this general direction, you would have had Brigadier General John M. Jones's brigade of Virginians, and they would head up the right side of Culp's Hill. Now I'm going to scan to my left, and in this general direction, you had Brigadier General George H. Maryland Stewart, and his brigade was mixed. He had some North Carolinians, some Marylanders, and some Virginians, and they were assaulting the left side of Culp's Hill. Now, in this general area, up the middle, you had a brigade of Louisianians under the command of Colonel Jesse M. Williams, and all 3 of these Confederate brigades would total around 4,000 men. So around 7 p.m., they'd begin to step off in the general vicinity of the Benner's Hill area. They would cross Rock Creek, and they would make their way in this general direction. Now, as soon as the 1st Louisiana would cross Rock Creek, they would attempt to reform, and the Lieutenant Colonel, Michael Nolan of the 1st Louisiana, would be hit and mortally wounded. So the Confederate forces weren't even starting their attack up Culp's Hill, and they're already taking casualties from Union artillery in this general area. So we're kind of in the middle of the Confederate attack here, and through this area, like we touched on, was Colonel Jesse Williams' brigade, and he had a brigade of Louisianians consisting of the 1st, 2nd, 10th, 14th, and 15th Louisiana, and they'd come right through this way, making their way up the slopes of Culp's Hill here. Now, although the Confederates heavily outnumbered the Union forces in this area, it was no easy task making your way up through this difficult terrain here. And you can just see, it seems pretty subtle on the camera, but when you're walking it in person, it's a pretty aggressive slope. And positioned on that slope, you had the Union breastwork. So right around 100 yards from the Union lines here, the Louisiana Brigade would stop and begin returning fire. Remember, it's dark. You don't really know where the lines exactly are. All you see is really the muzzle flashes. This area is filled with smoke with all the black powder rifles firing, so you can just imagine how chaotic it is. You have no idea what's happening on your right or left. All you know is you're taking some pretty heavy casualties to the front. So you can just imagine trying to take advantage of what the terrain is offering you here. You know, you're bouncing from tree to tree, trying to get some cover. This rock here is called Forbes Rock and affords quite a bit of cover. So you can just imagine being a Confederate soldier being in this area, and just beyond the rock here, you have your Union defenses. So now we're behind Forbes Rock. It's rather large. You can probably fit at least 10 to 15 guys behind this. Probably a good area to shelter some of the wounded as well. But imagine you're a Confederate soldier. The mini balls are pinging off this rock. They're buzzing over your head. They're crashing against the trees. You can just imagine the sounds. You know, you peer out, maybe fire a shot, come back in, reload, and continue to advance. Again, we're about, I would say, probably right around 75 yards from the Union defenses here, maybe a little less. So imagine we're in the Louisiana Brigade making our way up Culp's Hill. Just beyond here, air is thick with lead, bouncing off the trees. You can just imagine, you know, all the sounds of the bullets hitting the trees. Here, right behind me here is Forbes Rock. Imagine the bullets striking that. Taking shelter, the sounds. Now you're faced with the decision, do I continue to move or do I stay here and maybe ride out the attack and then retreat if we can no longer advance? You know, a situation that these soldiers probably had to deal with. You know, this is really the only solid cover in this area, because once you leave the cover of Forbes Rock, you're going right into the teeth of the Union defenses here. Kind of interesting to think about. It'd be hard to leave the cover of this rock. Good shelter, and it's probably a nice shelter for the wounded soldiers here as well, but I don't know, I kind of like to think about what was going through the minds of the soldiers here as they were attempting to make the summit here. Making our way up Culp's Hill here, and we just touched on how this area would have been very chaotic. And the 1st Louisiana advanced a little too far out ahead of their brigade, and they were exposed. And Sergeant Charles Clancy of the 1st Louisiana was carrying the regimental colors. And Clancy would advance too far and he'd be captured. He would remove that flag from its staff, wrap it tightly around his body, and he managed to keep that flag concealed throughout his 6-month-long imprisonment until he was paroled, and he would return that flag to his regiment. That's a pretty incredible story. You know, losing your colors in combat during this time was extremely demoralizing, and it was a huge morale boost for the enemy. So he was able to hide those colors and keep them hidden for almost 6 months during his imprisonment. So just to kind of reorient you, because we moved up the hill a bit, we started in that general area. Obviously you can see Forbes Rock just before us there. And we probably started about 10 to 15 yards past Forbes Rock, but we've made our way up Culp's Hill here, and we're pretty close to the Union defenses, and this is the general area of the 1st Louisiana, and they would have been squaring off against the 78th and 102nd New York in this general vicinity. But you can just see this terrain. You know, how are we supposed to scale this? It's night, you're exhausted, the air is as thick with black powder and lead, and you've made it this far, but how on earth are we going to scale these breastworks here? But here is another example of some of the terrain here at Culp's Hill. So you had the Union line all along here. We're going to work our way down a little bit this way, and I'll show you just how aggressive this slope truly gets when you climb it. So again, we started that way. I would say close to 50 yards in that general vicinity. So we've made our way back to the Union lines here, and in this portion of the battlefield, you may recognize this rock formation before us here. It was part of a famous picture. There used to be a few ads on the face of these rocks here. I guess they thought they can grab some advertisement revenue from visitors here at Gettysburg. But here's another example of how the Union would fortify this position using these rocks, and then they would have their breastworks incorporated in and around this area. And like we just touched on, we're in the area of the 102nd New York. I want you to take a look at this position here. So we're on the Union lines facing down. You have Forbes Rock in the distance here. Imagine being a Union soldier behind your breastworks here. Better yet, let's go right here. We're crouching, loading our musket, deliver around, and this is straight down, and go right back down to the safety of your works in these rocks here. Come back up, deliver another round. Really makes you admire the attackers here, because Culp's Hill saw the most continuous fighting here at the Gettysburg battlefield. It was relentless, and I think the Confederates lost close to 3,000 men killed, wounded, and captured in this area here. So now we're in the general vicinity of the 60th New York, and they were manning this position here on the Union left or the Confederate right. And just kind of give you the layout of the land here. There's their marker here, so their lines run in this general area. And the Confederates were advancing up this slope before us here. Now this is Jones' Brigade of Virginians, and they had the most difficult terrain to ascend here at Culp's Hill. And in this general area, you would have the 48th, the 42nd, and the 50th Virginia. And the 60th New York was able to repel the Virginians here with relatively light casualties. Obviously, not making light of the men they lost here, but compared to other units on the line here, the 60th suffered minimal in terms of losses in this general area. And like we touched on, you can just see how it just slopes straight down. And then to the Virginians' right, you had the Louisianians. I don't know if you can see, Forbes Rock is right there. So just to kind of tie in all these sites together for you. So in this area, you had the Confederate assault of Virginians coming up this hill here. So Greene's men were charged with holding the extreme right flank of the Union Army along these constructed earthworks here. Now, they had a pretty important job. They were essentially protecting the Baltimore Pike, which was a main supply route for the Union position here. And they would construct these breastworks. Luckily for the Union, I don't know if you can see them on the camera here. It's very subtle, but it runs right here. And you can kind of see if I look down, that really subtle rise. Well, those are the breastworks that the 1,400 men of the New York Brigade were manning upon the Confederate attack here. Now, if you're having a hard time painting an image as to what these breastworks look like with just the remnants, 11 days after the conclusion of the Battle of Gettysburg, Matthew Brady and his team snapped this image of the Union fortifications here. And just look at the detail on this image. Wow. So, again, those were the breastworks that were running along this line here. So we've moved down to what was now the Union right flank. And this area was held by the 137th New York. Now, initially, when Union forces would occupy Culp's Hill, their lines extended in this direction. However, due to fighting in other areas of the Union line, these forces were pulled from here to fight elsewhere along the Union fishhook. Well, that left the 137th, the extreme right flank of the Union Army, during this portion of the battle. And they would extend their lines in this general direction. Now, we touched on it earlier in the video, this sector of the battlefield was being attacked by Confederates from Maryland Stewart's Brigade. And they consisted of some Tar Heels, some Virginians, and some Marylanders. And things were getting a little precarious here on the Union right. You had two regiments from Virginia. I believe the 23rd and 10th Virginia would begin to outflank the Union forces here. Well, Colonel David Ireland, the commander of the 137th, would construct a traverse, which turned out to be one of the best decisions here at Gettysburg, at least in my opinion. And he would run at that traverse in this general area. So he would man this position and essentially refuse his line to meet the new threat on his flank. And the 137th would hold this line and blunt the Confederate advance in this general area. Now, I believe the 71st Pennsylvania would come to assist along with the 6th Wisconsin. However, those regiments didn't stay here long. But during this fight, over a third of the 137th New York would fall, defending the Union right flank. Now, not to take anything away from Colonel Chamberlain and the 20th Maine, but the men of the 137th don't get near as much recognition as they should. And I believe Ireland would die of dysentery later in the war, so perhaps that's why his story has been lost. But here is the general location of the 137th New York on the right flank of the Union line here. The fighting here at Culp's Hill would rage late into the night and pick back up in the early morning hours of July 3rd. The Confederates would make 3 more attacks here at Culp's Hill, and it is estimated that the Union defenders here fired over 250,000 rounds during their fight here at Culp's Hill, just behind me here. That's a lot of lead, and it's just a testament of how strong of a defensive position this truly was, even with some of the line compromised near the Spangler Spring area. Hope you enjoyed this one. I've never been here before, so I'm glad I checked this off my list. And as always, we're going to catch you on the next one.